What's the most unsettling thing you've ever heard a child say? Story 1. Driving on a dark highway in a light rain, and my 6-year-old daughter starts crying and getting panicky. I ask her what's wrong, and she says the accident is going to get us. Needless to say, I freaked and pulled over to wait out the rain a bit. Edit: no, there was no accident. Story 2. My kid was 3 to 4 years old and used to always talk to her poppy, my father-in-law. She'd tell us stories all the time about things Had told her, and they'd sing songs together. The only problem was he died when she was 2 years old. The songs freaked me out the most because she had never heard them, but would sing them. One night she sang the wrong words to Pearly Shells. She stopped, said, "What, Poppy?" but then sang the right words. Yeah, my hair stood up at that one. Story 3. 9-year-old girl in an art class proudly showed me a clay sculpture she made. Then asked me, "Do you want to keep it?" I then replied, "Are you sure? It looks beautiful. Don't you want to show that to your parents when you get home?" She then told me with a straight face, "No, my mom always throws away the stuff I make. And I don't have a dad anymore, so no one would care about it." I felt so bad for her. I promised to keep it forever, and it's still sitting in the windowsill. Story 4. I used to do tax prep for a living. So this guy stops by my office with his 5 kids to drop off his tax paperwork. Then he leaves the 5 kids in my office while he has to run and get something. Be back in a few minutes. While he was gone, I got an earful for the kids about how dad beats mom, and who leaves their kids for the tax accountant to babysit during tax season. Story 5. My stepkid at 3. He came out of his bedroom terrified and crying. He said there was an old man sitting on his bed with a suitcase. Took an hour to calm him. When his dad and I started asking questions, he told us the man came out of the closet. That closet always made my hair stand up. The kid never knew I was scared of it. Even today at 13, he remembers it. Story 6. The little kids on my mom's street were always running wild outside. One day I'm walking down our driveway, and the little girl across the street was drowning her baby doll in a kiddie pool. I asked her what she was doing, and she said this is what happens to bad babies. I babysat another girl on that street. I showed her our juicer and asked if she wanted any juice, and she said she wanted to put a human in there and drink bone juice. Children of the core neighborhood. Story 7. My niece was in the sick room at the daycare, just babbling away to herself while coloring. We asked her who she was talking to. Uncle Stinky. He's showing me how to draw a bear. My brother, an artist, died before she was born. My kids called him Uncle Stinky, and together they drew a series of bears. He carried the drawings in his portfolio so that they could take them out for art class and gauge their progress. No one other than my kids, husband, and myself knew any of this. Story 8. Once had a 10-year-old tell me he wanted to die and was planned on killing himself. No idea why the hospital thought mixing the teen and child psych wards for a few hours would be beneficial to anyone. Story 9. During a family reunion, one of my young cousins, maybe 5-ish at the time, came up to tell us someone is committing nudity. When they pointed to where it was happening, we all saw a meat-eat out of her mind woman in her 50s letting it all hang out and air out walking around a baseball diamond. Police showed up and arrested her. Story 10. I was watching a kiddo overnight, and about 10 minutes into the night, he looked at me and said, "You know, I'm a demon trapped in a 9-year-old's body." Right? Needless to say, when he started playing children's music at 3 a.m., I for sure thought it was the end of me. Story 11. Not a child, but still a minor. Listen to a teenage girl explain how she was adopted from a certain country as a small child because her adoptive father had a fetish for that race. Without getting into details, she was raised for exactly what you think. None of the counselors or CPS believed her because of her history and diagnoses, but the look in her eyes, the flat, calm way she told me, and said that it didn't matter anyway, I really don't think she was lying. I heard a lot of up stories working with adolescent psych, but that one just absolutely haunts me, and I still think about her years later and pray that life has been kinder to her. Story 12. It was what my creepy little of a son didn't say. 3 to 5, he would stand in the pitch black, just stand there. Then when I would go pee, he would scare the out of me. Also, when he was 3, he drew a picture of a tree falling on our house and said we all went to heaven. Hand to God, a dead tree fell on our roof that night, and we were so scared my wife was crying her eyes out, and we went and stayed at my mom's house. The tree was a skinny old rotted birch, so other than minor shingle damage we were good, but freaked us out bad. Story 13. I'm a hospice nurse, and a 4-year-old said the most unhinged thing during their grandfather's death visit as the funeral home was leaving with the patient's body. The kid came into the room. The kid's father started to explain, and the kid says, "Grandpa passed away." I know. H.A., you don't have a daddy anymore. You don't need a daddy. You can just be MY daddy. Story 14. I can't really think of anything a kid has said directly to me that was unsettling, but the other day a kid made me feel a bit weird. I work in retail, and I always like to interact with the children. Sometimes I'll have a conversation, but usually I will smile and wave, and they either will smile back, or sometimes they're shy and hide behind their mom, or whatever. The other day, I did the smile and wave thing to a little girl who was maybe 3 or so. She looked me in the eyes with a very adult look, frowned, and gave me a thumbs down. It was a bit unsettling, I guess, because WTF did I do wrong? Story 15, I live in a low-income neighborhood. Lots of kids I've seen grow up through the years. Some of them had no supervision, and I looked out for those kids. I didn't allow them in my house, and my boys weren't particularly close to any of them. But you neighborhood kids play together. I was always outside with my boys. All the kids got popsicles and water, just like my boys. Watermelon, any kind of summer snack. I once stopped a little boy, Jacob, from getting hit by another kid with a bat. I knew Jacob's cry because his mama gave 2 shits on a good day about him. Well, one day Jacob was nearby, said very suddenly, and with utter panic, I killed a boy when we lived in Louisville, a large city about 100 miles away. I'm sorry. I told all the other kids to get lost, and then asked him if he was serious. He looked panicked and said with urgency, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I asked if his mom knew. He said yes. Now, this kid was about 7, and he had problems. Maybe he was lying. I hope that was the case, but the kind of problems this kid had, I figured either way, he just needed a hug, which I gave him one, and just told him go play. He seemed fine then. They moved very shortly after, and I think of him often, but have no idea how he is. He'd be about 23 years old by now. The look on his face made me wonder if he was telling the truth. It was creepy. He's just one of them boys that just never had much of a chance, but hey, maybe he's thriving. They'll try to think of him that way from now on if he comes to mind. Story 16, I used to work at a dine in Pizza Hut. One day a mom came in with her son and some of his friends. The kids were around 12 years old. As I'm bussing a table near them, I overhear one of the kids' friends say, I kill animals. The mom replied, oh, your dad takes you hunting. And the kid says, no, I find cats in the neighborhood and take them into my backyard and kill them. I looked at the mom terrified, and she told the kid you shouldn't do that, and we shouldn't be proud to talk about such things. I think I met a future serial killer in the making. Still sends shivers down my spine with how nonchalantly and proudly he talked about it. Story 17, I was the kid, ID, sprained my ankle, and my mom took me to the ER to get it checked out. The doctor told me ID had been better off to have broken it. My response, I still can. I think I was 12 at the time, but the expression on that man's face will forever be a core memory. The dude was straight up horrified. LOL. Story 18, back in the late 90s, I did my student teaching in an early childhood special education class. All the kids were great, but there was one little guy, Bradley, who was about 4 years old and as cute as a button. One day his mother informed us that she had woken up to him standing over her with a knife. They told me, to mommy. A few days later in class, we were all sitting doing circle time when Bradley, who had been sitting on my lap and sucking his thumb, got up and walked directly to the back of the room. He stood there silently, facing the wall, nodding his head. A minute later, he settled back into my lap. I'm sorry, they needed to talk to me. Plopped his thumb in his mouth and put his head on my chest, where I'm sure he could hear my heartbeat racing. I still think about that little guy. Story 19, when my son was around 3, he said he remembered when he was bigger and the people drove by going bang, 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 and that's how he died. He pointed his chest, right where his birthmark is, and said, see, they hit me right here. Story 20, when my son was about 5, he was really getting into music and loved Buckcherry. At the time, his first hit was a song called Sorry. We were driving somewhere, and that song was on the radio. Son, why do you think he's sorry me? I don't know, it sounds like he had an argument with his girlfriend. Son, nah. I think he hit her with a stick. Me what, no, he's just sorry that they were arguing. Son, nope. I'm pretty sure he hit her with a stick. Less unsettling, but odd. Around the same time, and also driving, he tells me that he's going to change his name when he gets older. I'm like, okay, cool. What name? He says Stephen Baldwin. Like WTF, he would have had no idea who Stephen Baldwin was. Alec Baldwin's brother, for those who don't know, small-time actor, and that name is very different from his own name. And strangely enough, I'm adopted, and more than a decade later, I found my birth mom. Guess what her last name was? Baldwin. Story 21, my nephew, age 4, was once asleep in his room. Got up, came to find me. I was in the living room and announced, if we go to the park tomorrow, we won't come back, not ever again. So let's not. Then stood there, staring, until I agreed we wouldn't go to the park the next day. He then went back to bed like nothing ever happened. The really creepy part was that I had texted my sister about 5 minutes before he came into the room and mentioned maybe taking him to the new skate park the next day. Needless to say, we didn't go. It's behind you when there was nothing visible to me behind me. Story 22, a man was a trucker. He was married and had 2 daughters. One of them was my age, and the other one a couple of years younger. I was 7 at the time. While out driving trucks, he was seeing different women. He got HIV, passed it on to his wife before he died. She didn't know. Sad to see. Wife started dating another guy. He got HIV from her. The wife had the kids tested a few times. They were negative. The younger girl got sick, lost weight, and died. Found out to have been positive. Older girl, Charmaine, also tested positive. We then heard Charmaine narrate how she got raped by the mother's boyfriend, had also raped the younger sister, Chennai. She narrated how he did it. Was haunting, especially accompanied by the sight of her gaunt figure, her tears, and the way she cried. The mother's boyfriend was in cuffs with his head down. It wasn't long before Charmaine's mother offed herself. I remember Charmaine's haunting cries, asking what she did wrong to the world to have been dealt such a hand. She was dead within months. There are things about that children shouldn't know or experience, ever, but that girl went through it. My son was like maybe 4 years old, and I got an anonymous call on my phone. I ignored it. A minute later, my phone rang again with an anonymous number. My son was playing with toys, didn't even look away, but he says it's Dad calling. I looked at him. He didn't even look up, but I answered. It was my husband. Our car had gotten a flat on his way to work. His phone died. So he was calling from a company near where the car was, so I could call for assistance for him. I looked at my son with all my confusion. He never stopped playing. If that kid hadn't said that, my husband would have been stranded. The company wasn't going to let him make another call. We all joke about it now, but it's such a WTF moment. Story 23, it bothers me that Elon's 4-year-old bodyguard told the alleged president of the United States to shut his mouth, and he's not the president, and nobody is questioning that. Story 24, my son only said a few words until he was almost 3. When he finally started talking at 3, he would tell me daily about Alex, and all the time they spend together. We've never spent time around an Alex, and there is no Alex on the TV shows he had watched, so I don't know how he came up with the name. One day, he saw a boy who was about 6 years old at a restaurant and ran up yelling Alex. Alex. This lasted about 6 months, and now he doesn't remember Alex. Story 25, it was me. I was the kid, lol. When I was about 4 years old, I was sitting beside my grandma. We were looking out the window. An ambulance went racing by, said that's for Grandpa. She thought it was weird, but shook off the feeling, didn't think much of it. A bit later, she got a call that had fallen off the side of a cliff while hiking. He was still alive in good condition, just roughed up. Turns out the ambulance that had gone by was for him, since it was headed in the direction of the trail he'd been hiking at. Also used to talk a lot about my brothers, how both of them died young. One from drowning, the other from house fire. It's funny, I can still see the house burning, even though I've never seen that house in my life. I'm an only child, too. Used to freak my mom out a lot, but she always took it seriously. Never played it off as a wild imagination or anything. Story 26, my 5-year-old niece walked into a grocery store with me and her very pregnant mom and loudly declared to everyone my daddy put a baby in mom's belly. And now he's going to put one of mine, too. Because he loves me so much, cue the horrified stares. She then went up to random shoppers to tell them about her future baby, which she was sure was going to be a bumblebee. We had to have an impromptu ed talk in the cereal aisle before someone arrested us all. My brother and his wife had tried to explain the new baby in kid-friendly terms, but apparently that just confused the poor girl. Story 27, last Mother's Day. I was in Mass. I was sitting next to a mother and her 4-year-old daughter. The preacher gave the word and was talking about mothers, how we should respect, value, appreciate them, etc. He asked rhetorically if you should kill anyone in your family, who would that be? The 4-year-old said, myself, under her breath. I was like, huh. I kept my head straight, but turned my eyes in their direction, and her mother literally grabbed her mouth, then grabbed her by the arm and dragged her out the back doors to yell and spank her outside. Story 28, I was put into a psychiatric treatment hospital in my youth, 12 years old. They forgot to lock a door one day, and I wandered in because there's not much else to do. I found a very small child crying on the floor of a freezing, cold padded room. I asked her how old she was, and she said she was 4. I asked her why she was there, and she stopped crying and took on a super creepy, serious expression, and without missing a beat, she told me she was there because she told her teacher she was going to kill herself. I asked her if she were going to, and she very flatly said yes. I stuck a pencil in my ear and tried to push it out the other side, but they held me down and then took me to hospital. Her demeanor made it so unsettling, and the fact that someone so small could make such a big, horrible decision and actually act upon it, of course. Story 29, my daughter spent the night with her grandmother. My mom called me, almost panicked, and told me that my daughter had woke up, looked her in the face, and said, is my pawpaw not dead yet? She was 3. He had been in remission from throat cancer for just about a year. Weirdest thing was only a week before I'd taken a midday nap, and I woke up crying hysterically, dreamed that I was viewing my dad's body in a black casket. I told my mom what I dreamed, and we had a conversation about how strange it all was. 3 months later, my entire family gets COVID. This was late 2020, and they told us to go to the ER. If anyone began having chest pains, my dad was vaccinated and had been asymptomatic, but began having pains in his chest. So I drove into the ER. He comes out extremely solemn, and I asked what was wrong. He informed me that the cancer had come back, and he was being referred to oncology. He died in 2023. I know kids pick up on things, but at her age we had never told her he was dying. She knew he was sick because she could physically see it, but the first time he was diagnosed he had a good prognosis, so we didn't discuss the dying. For her to say in such a way was so strange, and I still think of the dream and her words. My dad was buried in a black U.S. Army casket. He looked the same during that viewing as he did in my dream. I had never told my family how he looked or what kind of casket he was in. I also never told them about the dream. Story 30 preschool teacher at the time had a 4-year-old tell me how he hated me so much and I was ruining his life. So he was going to hurt me, tie me up, then lock me into school and burn it down with me inside. All because I didn't let him violently assault another child. His parents were the most useless and willfully ignorant people LV ever met. Didn't do about him tormenting his older brother. He'll never forget his name because every single day I watched the news waiting to see it come up in an article about a boy killing his brother. Before he was kicked out of our school, I did have to fill out a report for him for a psych eval. Edit, he was also one of the cutest and often sweetest kids I ever worked with. He loved me, and I was one of like 3 people that could ever calm him. I've also never met anyone else capable of lying the way he did. You could watch him rip a page out of a book, ask him why he did it, and he would look you dead in the eye and say he didn't rip the book as he was holding the pages in his hands. If you contradicted that, he would loose it, scream, cry, etc., but he would never admit the truth. It was like he believed his own lie, but I had reasons I never believed that. Story 31, if you wouldn't have came and checked on me, I would have died. I worked for my state CPS for a couple years, and I had a 9-year-old say that to me after being brutally beaten by our guardian. I know CPS gets a bad rap. And while I'm glad I am no longer in that position, it is one of the instances I'm glad I was able to help. Story 32, maybe a little more sad than unsettling. I had a neighbor kid try and grab my cigarette out of my hand once. I asked what he was doing, and he said he liked to smoke those. I curiously asked if he smoked anything else. I like blunts. Kid was maybe 5 at the time. Also, this was like 10 p.m., and he was just outside wandering up to my porch. Story 33, my family was babysitting a relative's kid. I think he was 4 or 5 at the time for the 4th of July about 10 years ago. And the traffic was so bad on our way to the park to watch fireworks that we were worried we wouldn't get there on time. And this adorable, cherubic little kid said petulantly, "If we don't get to see the fireworks, it'll kill my family." When we said that wasn't nice, he said defensively, "Well, it'll kill myself too," as if offended that we'd assume he could dish it out but not take it. For what it's worth, we did get to the park on time to see the fireworks. So he's grown into a perfectly nice kid with no criminal record. Story 34, I'm a few years retired after a 32-year career as a South Bronx elementary school teacher. I worked in one of the worst schools in New York City that exhibited every social ill found in the United States to the nth degree. In the early 1990s, I had a class from. I don't have the words to describe the psychotic, out-of-control behavior in that class. My school was overcrowded, and I had 38 students, 25 boys, and 13 girls in my 3rd grade class. One of the girls in my class was named Jessica. To say that her behavior was vile is an understatement. Unless you have taught in an elementary school, is out-of-control area, one cannot imagine the behavior of this 3rd grade girl. Most people in a civilized area would have no reference to the behavior this girl exhibited. For a man being scared to turn his back on a little girl is a frightening concept. She was also physically a beautiful child who could have come right from a Norman Rockwell painting. One day, she told me that her daddy just got out of jail and he wants to see you. Definitely not something you want to hear. Another time, she shared a mumbling story about someone who she called an uncle who used to come around, but he longer did, and last night my daddy and his friend were digging a hole in his backyard. Let's just say I immediately stopped the conversation there. No more Jessica stories because I don't want to turn the stomach of any reader. She should really have starred in a remake of movie Rosemary's Baby or the movie The Exorcist. Story 35, I was in a Marshall's behind a woman and toddler, and the kid straight up yelled, "Shut up," at his mom. Everyone in line collectively gasped. I worked at a UPS store once, and there was a long line of customers in the store. I was the only cashier. A kid was sitting on the floor by the door next to his mom at the end of the line and says, "The voices are talking to me again." I froze and glanced up but quickly went back to helping the customers, hoping to get them out of the store as quickly as possible. I told myself that the kid was probably just saying it for attention, but it gave me the creeps. Story 36, when my now 11-year-old son was 3, he said to me, "I know what you will look like when you die." I asked him what I would look like. He said skinny. Currently, I have terminal cancer and have lost a lot of weight. My daughter, when she was 2, would do the thing where she would suddenly appear standing at the end of my bed at 2 a.m. in complete darkness, apparently staring at me. "Is that you, Penny?" "No." Story 37, she was 4, told me her best friend was a zombie who lived in the walls. A few years later, I was coughing. Guess it was too loud. Says, "Can you die a little quieter?" Story 38, I think my goddaughter was around 6 when we planned to go on vacation together. She knew we were planning to drive, and we told her that she could bring one suitcase because there were going to be 4 people in the car, and we didn't have a lot of space. Then she learned we were going to Castle Bolt Castle on Hard Island and decided that she needed a second suitcase for dresses because she wouldn't know which one she would want to wear until the day of. I reminded her about the one suitcase rule, and this adorable angel said to me, "It'll sit in the middle of the back seat, and you can build a fort of suitcases around me. And then when we get in a car accident, it'll be safe, and you'll all be dead." She did not get a second suitcase. Story 39, I squeezed too hard. I need another, son a cousin of mine, about 10, explaining why his hand was red. The little just killed his hamster and didn't show any remorse. I was looking a killer. Story 40, am giving a state-mandated evacuation exercise for a school bus to an elementary school class. Kids raise hands for questions. I pick one and say, "What's your question, buddy?" The child stands up in the aisle, no taller than the seat, boldly states, "If we die, we die." I promptly reply, "That will never happen on my bus. They'll carry 10 kids out if I have to." I'm still shaken by his confidence. Story 41, my son, at 6, told me he would die when he was 10. He didn't, but he had an accident that resulted in severe TBI, which left him permanently disabled. Story 42, upon hearing the Trans-Siberian Orchestra's version of Carol of the Bell for the first time, my 5-year-old looked me in the eye and with a low, grave voice said, "This music sounds dangerous." It was creepy and adorable all at once, haha. Story 43, my 4-year-old daughter says that before she was born, she was a ghost. And when she was a ghost, she would spy on us because she couldn't wait to be alive and living with us. Story 44, my niece was about 5 when she told her dad that when she was dead, his father, her dead grandfather, told her to be born again to take care of him. Out of the blue, no reason, no relating conversation, my dad died 18 years before she was born. Creepy and comforting. Story 45, once, when my little cousins were around 5 and 7, I asked the younger one to draw me a picture of his favorite animal. He looked at me for a sec, then grabbed a black crayon and just started making one big black circle, looping over it again and again. I was a little surprised, so I laughed and said, "Oh, wow. What animal is that, bud?" And he just flatly said, "No joke, the Dark of Nowhere." I must have made a face because his big brother, trying apparently to be helpful, said from across the room, "Oh, don't worry, the Dark of Nowhere is just like a man who's like a shadow." He said it so matter-of-factly, like it explained everything. If this sounds a little contrived, it's worth noting that their mother is a horror film fanatic, so this wasn't totally out of character for them. But that big black void on the page, and kiddo saying Dark of Nowhere, as if that meant anything, was still creepy. Oh. Story 46, can we keep him? We can lock the doors and tell people he was never here. My kid on meeting the person I would start dating later, cued to serial killer in 10 seconds. Story 47, I know this is going to sound fake, but I swear to you, I do not even believe in ghosts or spirits. When my niece was about 1, still unable to speak in complete sentences, stood up at her crib in the dead of night and said, "There's someone in the room with us, clear as day." I jumped out of bed, went to check on her, and she just laid back down and went to sleep. That was 29 years ago, and it still gives me the heebies. Story 48, a few years back, my son pointed out that our mean as a snake and old as Methuselah neighbor still had Christmas decorations up on her porch. I told him maybe she was leaving them up until Mardi Gras, or maybe she was waiting until her adult kids came to visit to help take them down. He thought about that for a moment, and goes, "She's pretty old, so maybe she's dead." I of course said I was sure this wasn't true, but immediately started trying to remember the last time I actually saw her. It was a busy day, so I forgot about the incident entirely until that night when I saw police cars next door and an ambulance arrives without lights or sirens. She actually was dead. Now, if her demise had been predicted by an adult, it would have been weird, but my son was like 6, so it was beyond unsettling at the time. Story 49, my toddler started with, "Mummy, I like your eyes, and am all you little sweetheart," till he followed up with them when I put them in my pocket. Story 50, I was sitting on the stoop with my infant niece when a 3-year-old neighbor came by and said I'm going to slit that baby's throat with a butcher knife. He was troubled. Story 51, a little 4-year-old who had just enrolled in my class via emergency foster placement told me about the night her daddy bounced her mommy's head off the toilet and bounced the baby off the floor. Story 52, I once heard my son giggle in his room past his bedtime, so I opened his door and he was sitting up in his bed and making faces at the corner. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Grandpa says I'm a big boy. His grandpa died almost 2 years ago." Story 53, my 5-year-old sister ran up to me, all blonde-haired curls, and said, "Guess what? I saw a dead. It had blood, and blood was said with a demonic voice, was creepy. I was walking with some friends and passed by 2 kids. One was probably 12 and the other way around 8. The younger kid said to my friend, "Girl, let me eat that." We still say it every once in a while for a LOL, but also kind of scared for anyone who crosses paths with him once he becomes an adult. Story 54. One time my cousin's daughter came to visit my grandma's house. My grandma had a picture hanging of my grandfather, who had passed away years before she was born. The daughter, who was about 3 or so, pointed at the picture of him and said it's Papa his name. It was a picture of him as a young man, and she didn't recognize pictures of him when he had been elderly. Since then, here are other things she said. I was scared to be born, but Papa his name helped me. Papa his name comes to visit us, and he flies away in a red car with his dog. He had loved cars. His favorite one was a red one. And when she described the dog, it was a dog he had had before. None of these are in any pictures. I don't know, man. Story 55. 4-year-old girl shopping with grandmother at Walmart. She asks about a magic 8-ball, and Granny explains how it works. Shakes ball, are the shadows real? Story 56. My son used to talk about his wife and children he had before the fairies took him away and then brought him back to be in my belly. Swore up and down that a little girl he was in the same class as was his wife from then, as well, who died in a fire with his daughter. Had so many details that I looked it up, and these people actually existed, and the wife and daughter did in fact die in a fire. He was 4 when he started saying these things, and when asked to draw one of these fairies that took him away, he said they look exactly like the one on the Christmas tree mummy. An angel. He thought they were fairies because of the wings. He still occasionally comes out with things that could only come from his soul, but at 10 he doesn't remember what he used to say, and we don't ask. Story 57. I worked at a PCYC Police Citizens Youth Club in Australia doing vacation care many years ago. It was a fairly low socioeconomic areas. One day we had firefighters have a demonstration day for the kids. Everyone had a blast. The blokes handed out lollipops to all the kids. I was supervising from nearby when a little girl, 7 years old from memory, came up to and stood in front of me looking up. I asked if she liked the fire truck, which she did, and asked if was enjoying her lollipop. Without skipping a beat, she pulled it out of her mouth and said in practicing. Now, kid will say all sorts of things, but given the area it was in and there were kids on our care that came from abusive households, it wasn't a chance I could take. The thing about working at a PCYC, the boss is a police officer, so he was told, parents, and the little girl questioned, she never came back to the club. We heard rumors sometime later that her uncle had been arrested. I'm a dad to a little girl now, and just thinking about that encounter makes my blood boil still, nearly 20 years later. Story 58. When I was pregnant, my friend brought his 4-year-old over. He was talking with my husband, and she was chatting with me about 4-year-old stuff. Out of nowhere, she says, "How do you know the baby's not drinking your blood in there?" Story 59. When my daughter was a toddler, she was fiddling around with my phone and wound up creating a handful of gibberish events in my Google Calendar. She managed to set a reminder for about 6 months' time. At 4 in the morning, that simply said kill. Story 60. My son and I used to live in an apartment near a walking trail, part of which wound through a cemetery. We walked in the cemetery every evening like clockwork. He was little, like 3, no knowledge of what a cemetery is. We had done it 100 times, and then all of a sudden one evening he burst into hysterical tears and was squirming, trying to get out of his chair on the back of my bike, and like whisper, crying, "We have to get out of here. They don't want us here." It made my blood run cold. He continued to be hysterical until we were clear of the cemetery. But the freakiest part was that as we were continuing down the trail toward home, a police car pulled onto the bike trail to come up to me and ask if I'd seen anybody, which I hadn't. He said they were looking for someone who was dangerous and my son, and I should stay off the trail. Then he followed us the rest of the way home. Totally freaky. I've never forgotten.